Hello my dear students, so this is the third reporter. Ang aming ire-report or ang aming ibibigay na learning sa inyo is about methods of practice. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show at sana may maintindihan kayo sa buong lessons na aming ibibigay or aming i-discuss. Without further ado, let's get started into the video. Our topic is all about in methods of practice. And there are teaching methods and there are 4 types of teaching new skills. So the first one is instructing. Instruction must be given for them to complete the tasks or the skills. There's maybe a written or verbal. So the teacher must be ensure the students acknowledge to require of them. So instructing, to give an structure or to teach, or to give and acknowledge, to teach and to train. The second one is demonstrating. The teacher may provide the demonstration of the skills or maybe gets peer to perform it. So, demonstrating, it is the use to communicate an idea with the aid of visual such as flip chart or poster, paper, point. So, it is the process of teaching someone how to make or do something in step-by-step process. And the number 3 is applying. The applying is the situation or practices, the skills or plan situation to help them to transfer the learning from the practice and competitive situation. So applying, it is the teaching and the learning strategies to emphasize the activities of the student in process is causing the student to be able to use all their abilities in their keeping various required learning activities. And the last one, it is the confirming. This is all feedback and providing information for the student how to success they have been. So confirming is the process which instructor or utilize the communication to recognize the acknowledge student for their efforts while fulminating the importance of as individual.
So we will now move on to the types of practice. First one is the fixed practice. Fixed practice is when the same movement skill is practiced over and over again and the environment doesn't change. For example, a basketball free throw, as the player chooses when to take the shot, is always in the same situation each time. And sometimes is also known as drills and involves repeatedly practicing a whole skill in order to strengthen the motor program. This type of practice are good for close skill and self-paced skills, as here the environment has no impact and the performer chooses when to perform the skill. In addition, this happens over a number of practice sessions. It's just because it is practiced over and over again. So here are the advantages and disadvantages of fixed practice. The advantages of fixed practice is to improve consistency of close skills and self-paced skills. Close skills are the skills that are not affected by the environment. This is typically a skill which is performed in a non-team-based situation. For example, a javelin throw or a discus throw, a skill which is performed in stationary movement. While self-paced skills are controlled by the performer. The performer decides on when to execute this skill, such as in athletics when throwing the javelin or in gymnastics when vaulting. Externally, paced skills are controlled by the environment. They include a decision and a reaction. Next is the environment never changes, allowing the performer to replicate the same technique every time. And it can help to reduce the pressure on the performer during a competitive situation. Then this is the disadvantage of fixed practice. Can become boring because it is repetitive for the performer and it is decreased levels of motivation. The second type of practice is the mass practice. Mass practice is when one skill is practiced repetitively without breaks. As there are no breaks, the fitness of the performer must be taken into account when deciding how long the sessions will be. And this is a continuous form of practice which is best for simple skills. An example would be a rally in the badminton where the learner must repeatedly perform drop shots. This causes fatigue and therefore simulates the latest stages of a game. Also, this practice method is most appropriate for close and self-paced skills similarly to fixed practice. The advantages can help improve the consistency of skills and move them into the autonomous phase of learning. This phase involves further practice of this skill in order to enhance performance so that it becomes automatic. In addition, the autonomous phase of learning is the final stage of learning and when a skill has been overlearned and automatically recalled when needed. For example, the athlete who was learning how to serve in tennis can now begin to learn how to apply spin to their serve. While the disadvantages of mass practice, it can be boring and demotivating for the performer as it is very repetitive and as there are no breaks, there is no extrinsic feedback from a coach. Then, the quality of training may deteriorate as the performers become increasingly fatigued. Then the third type of practice is the distributed practice. This is when there are breaks during the training sessions and it allows the performers to rest and receive extrinsic feedback from a coach. Also, this method of practice is most useful for a continuous skills but can be applied to almost any skill type. For example, a 100 meter could run 100 meters then go back to a coach to receive feedback on how to improve technique. The advantages then can receive extrinsic feedback from a coach between performances. Extrinsic feedback is feedback from outside the performer. Extrinsic is important as someone watching the skill can observe and explain what needs to be done too. Then the performer can rest and recover both physically and mentally. And having intervals allows for mental rehearsal. Mental rehearsal will be discussed by the next reporter. However, mental rehearsal is when the performer visualizes the skill in their head before they carry out the skills. While the disadvantages of it, the time will be managed ineffectively so the rest interval is longer than the working interval, so it can be time-consuming, maybe boring, and demotivating for the individual.
So now let's proceed to mental rehearsal. So when we say mental rehearsal, it is also known as visualization or imagery. And it says here that this is when the performer visualizes the skills in their head before they carry out the skills. So, for example, yung isang gymnast is bago niya mai-perform or may isagawa yung isang movement, kailangan isipin niya muna or magpo-process muna sa kanyang isip or yung tinatawag nilang mental rehearse bago niya maisagawa yung isang movement. And para rin sa ganun, makaiwas sila sa mga fracture or injuries. And also, mental rehearsal can give the athletes a stronger mindset and assist them in making smarter decisions by mentally practicing how they plan to perform that certain movement or activities. And also, it can help to build up confidence in a performer. So now, let's move on to the methods of practice, wherein there are 4 methods: the part practice, the whole practice, the whole practice, and also the progressive part practice. So when we say part practice, is when a sports coach breaks down a skills and coaches or teaches a separate part of these skills before bringing the whole skills back together again. And it's often used for teaching serious skills that have smaller skills that make up the larger skills, such as a basketball layup. And also, when we say part practice, these are the tasks is learned by practicing its components before combining them. For example, in part practice is in basketball, 'di ba? Bago ka mag-shoot, kailangan i-practice mo muna yung proper execution on how to hold the ball bago mo ito i-shoot sa may ring. And a negative of part practice is that it can take longer for learners to learn these skills compared with other practice methods.
Whole practice.
Whole practice is when a sports coach teaches a skill together without breaking this apart. Whole practice is sometimes used by a sports coach because some skills are very difficult to break down. Example of this is sprinting, cycling, rowing. So, itong method na to ay very useful kasi it allows learners to experience the feel for a skill at mas mabilis matutunan kesa sa part practice. However, whole practice could potentially lower the quality of the performance as part practice enables coaches to break down the skill to provide more detailed feedback. So, mas lower yung yung potential ng quality of the performance kasi it enables coaches to break down the skill at mag-provide ng more detailed feedback. Yun ang whole practice. Progressive part practice. The progressive part practice method is when a sports coach would coach or teach different parts of a skill and then bring this all together to create a complete skill. Ang example ng progressive part practice method would be when coaching or teaching the triple jump technique. A coach would begin with the run up, then take off, then flight, and followed by the landing. Each skill would link to one another. This is a slow process but allows weaknesses to be targeted and for the performer to understand the relationship of the subroutines. So, mas maiintindihan ng mga performer yung mga routines na ginagawa nila. So, progressive part practice helps to develop a skill that needs a lot of information. Coaches can also break the skill into useful chunks and then slowly build the whole skill together. So, yung progressive part practice, it helps to develop a skill. And mas marami kang matututunan or mas marami kang makukuha na information. And then, sa coaches din, magbibigay sila ng mga skill, ng mga useful skill, ng parang paunti-unti lang. And it will also slowly build the whole skill together para mas maging successful yung gagawin mong mga routines or mga skills, ganon. Lastly is whole practice. The whole practice method is when a coach observes the whole skill before identifying areas to improve. So, yung coach ay i-oobserbahan niya muna yung mga skill na parang ituturo niya or ganon before i-identify yung mga areas na pwede pang i-improve, na pwede pang mas tutukan, ganon. The sports coach would then develop and improve an area within their performance before bringing the whole skill back together. So, syempre, pag nakita na nila or na-identify na nila yung mga areas na parang weak sila, ganon, na kailangan pang i-improve, ganon, mas magiging maganda yung performance nila before i-bring yung mga whole skill or yung kabuuang skill back together. So, an example of this would be a football coach observing a small-sided passing game and noticed their athletes were making errors when receiving the ball. The coach would then provide some support on how to receive a pass through different skill or different practice or drills and then bring it all back again into the same small-sided passing game. This gives the performer a sense of the whole skill before they break it down and improve on the weak aspect of the performance. Ang example din ito, kunyari sa volleyball, parang weak ka sa pagsiserve. So, yung coach mo na na-identify niya or nalaman niya na weak ka nga sa pagsiserve, ganon. So, tuturuan ka niya ng mga techniques, ng mga dapat mong gawin para ma-perfect mo or mas ma-improve mo yung pag-serve mo. So, in that case, mas magiging maganda yung mga performance nyo or yung magiging laro nyo if ever na masolusyonan nyo yung mga weaknesses ng mga players. The wool method is useful for athletes new to a sport as they can get a feel for the skill if they have never performed it before. So, itong wool method pala is useful siya sa mga baguhan or mga beginners sa, kunyari, sa larong basketball, hindi siya masyadong marunong, ganun. Itong the wool method is useful sa kanila kasi syempre, kailangan pa nila ng mga techniques, ng mga support sa coach nila na yung mga coach naman nila na pwedeng magbitaw ng mga magagandang skill or technique na pwede nilang gamitin para mas maging maalam sila sa game na yon. It can also be quicker than the part practice method. So, mas madali siyang sundan kaysa sa part practice method. How can understanding the different methods of practice help you? So, sa tingin nyo, ano bang kahalagahan kung bakit dapat nating alaman yung mga different methods of practice and how can it help you as an individual? So, each method of practice come with its own purpose. Syempre, may purpose yung mga whole part practice, yung mga part practice, mga ganon. So, may kanya-kanya silang purpose, syempre. At syempre, advantages. At syempre, meron din namang disadvantage. Hindi naman natin yan maiiwasan. So, being aware of the different methods will enable you to plan your sports coaching sessions for effectively and should also enable you to understand why it is useful. Why it is useful to sometimes break down a skill and sometimes useful not to. So, bilang isang sports coach, kailangan mong malaman yung mga methods na to para syempre mas maging effective and kailangan malaman mo din or ma-understand mo on how it is useful for you and for your yung syempre yung mga kino-coach mo, ganon. So, ayun lang ang aming reporting. Thank you for listening and sana may naintindihan kayo sa aming reportings, and if you have any queries or questions, suggestions or clarifications, comment down below lang po yung mga kulang pa yung mga information, ganon, at gagawin po namin ang aming makakaya para sagutin lahat ng mga queries ninyo. So, that's all and thank you for listening, my dear students.